Welcome to the Courage Barbell Unlimited podcast with your host, legendary powerlifter and strength athlete, Chad Ikes. For most, the journey of strength starts in the gym, but should inevitably expand through all aspects of life. Join us as we discuss all things strength. Now, here's your host, Chad Ikes.
So today, this is another reason why I love doing podcasts, because there's people that I've looked up to, and now I actually get to talk to them on my podcast. And today we have Blaine Sumner, who is, well, he's a super heavyweight, and I always have a fondness in my heart for super heavyweights. But Blaine put up some crazy numbers in single ply, and I think I have it right down here, like an 1135 squat, 1,000-pound bench, an 815 deadlift for a 2857, which I believe, wasn't that an all-time? Or actually, I think a couple of those numbers were all-time when you hit them.
Single ply, yep.
Yeah, I remember, because I've been following you for a long time, and I remember looking at your numbers and like, damn, those are big numbers, man.
It was cool to hear you start that intro saying that you look up to me or whatever. I remember back when Powerlifting USA was big and I was first getting started, my dad and I all the time looking up to you and your numbers and talking about you all the time, because I can't remember what years you were at your peak, but it was definitely at the time where I was starting to get more into the sport. And yeah, you're a name that we talked about frequently in my household growing up. So it's cool to be here.
That's awesome. I'm honored by that. I still like it's weird. And you probably kind of feel the same way, I would imagine, at this point. Like, you kind of make it to the top level, but you still don't really think of yourself that way. And you're still looking at other lifters and you're still like, holy shit, look at that lifter and look what they're doing. And you're still like amazed by what everyone else is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even at that, like, the sport changes, it gets better, it progresses. That's a good thing for the sport. So I'm looking at it and I'm looking at your numbers and go, dude, this dude just kicked my ass and he's single ply. I was double ply. So I just still have this appreciation for it, So like, it's still exciting to me to watch lifters. And even there's some of the raw guys now, I'm like, wow, like those numbers were not even thought of possible as raw at that time. But that's the progression of the sport, and that's awesome.
It's been unreal. The explosion's been absurd the last handful of years.
Yes, there's definitely a big wave going on. So I don't know that much about your past. So I kind of want to start with, like, when did you get into lifting? You played college ball, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I was always an athlete as my primary goal through growing up, through Little League and high school. I did football, wrestling, and lacrosse, and then a little bit of track and field in high school. But football and wrestling were always my favorite sports, my top goals. When I got into high school, kind of got exposed to the weight training and always loved it and fell in love with it. I was real skinny and small as a high school freshman. I was about 6 foot, 135 pounds, and was piss poor weak.
You at 135? Are there pictures of this somewhere?
Wrestling pictures of me in a singlet back around that size. Yeah.
See, this is the kind of shit I really love, especially for my listeners, because I can't put on size. Oh yeah, you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big guys that started out pretty skinny.
Just genetically, I think that's kind of my natural build, because my brother, who never got into strength training, he's about my height and I don't know, 200 pounds less than me.
Wow. So how tall are you?
6'3".
Okay, so you're a little taller than me, but I think because I was about my best competition weight was 380 to 385.
That's exactly where I was too.
So we're pretty close.
Yeah.
So you basically, it's like I would say my natural body weight like always fluctuated between probably 220 to around 275, like before powerlifting, before I got crazy.
Uh-huh.
What do you say? What do you think your natural weight is? Like, what does your brother weigh?
I think my brother's about 185.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I got a brother that's actually about 185 too.
And so my dad has always been into strength training and powerlifting, and actually was my first exposure to it. So he's bigger than average, but my uncle is about the same build as my brother, tall and skinny,
Yeah.
and that's too before I got into the weights.
So you were carrying a couple 100 pounds, probably more than your natural body weight.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So
So I tell people, you can get bigger. You got to eat more, man. You're not forcing it.
I started off high school at 135. Sophomore year, I think I was 160 to 170. Junior year, I was 200 to 215. And then senior year, I really got up there. I think I graduated about 250, 260.
How strong were you in high school, like lifting wise?
Freshman, I was piss poor weak. Like I remember doing our training as incoming freshman to the high school team. I think I had the second weakest bench on the team. Um, I don't remember if I could bench a 25 on each side or 35, but I was the second weakest. And I really got bit by the iron bug and poured everything into getting bigger and stronger all through high school. And by the time I graduated, I was strong. I think I benched almost 400, high 300s, squat little above 600, and deadlift wasn't really a thing for me at the time because it was more football focused. But my power clean was when I graduated a little above 300.
Those are really good high school numbers. So did your dad kind of help you? When your dad, because you said your dad was into it, did he kind of help you in high school, or did you just kind of do your own thing with the football and stuff?
Yeah, he helped me a lot. And my mom too. She was a high school PE teacher for almost her whole career. So I got a really awesome exposure from both my parents to just like the basic fundamentals and doing them the right way and doing them correctly. And then it was my graduating my senior year of high school. I knew I was going to head to play football and thought that I needed to get bigger and stronger to compete in college. And so my dad helped me find a powerlifting gym because he'd been out of the sport for so long and he didn't know who was what, and found me a gym in Colorado ran by Dan and Jen Gaudreau, who were a USAPL associated gym, and they were state chairs for forever and ever. And they're both world level competitors. And meeting them got me more exposed into like the powerlifting competition and more modern training.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, did you do any powerlifting meets in, or are you still focused on football?
Just for fun, I think I did 2 meets in the summer in the off season of football. Like one after my freshman year and then one after my junior year in college. And just for fun, like didn't really train. Certainly didn't peak for them because I was still training for football. But I always poured myself harder into the weights than anyone else did. Just trying to get stronger at benching
Yeah.
and squatting. Not so much deadlift, but power cleans.
Were those meets raw, or did you wear gear?
The first couple, the first one or two was raw, but at that time, so it had been like 2008 to 2010. Raw still wasn't much of a thing, so I, I half were raw, I'd say, and then half were single ply.
What were your numbers then? Like what
Man,
was your first 3 lift meet?
I think my first 3 lift meet was the summer between my high school and college years. I think I squatted with knee wraps. I think it was like 650. My competition bench was probably like 360, having to pause it, after doing the football
Yeah.
stuff. I didn't hardly train deadlifts because of football. I think my deadlift was maybe 550, 600.
So that was like what's that, 1,014, like 1,600 pound total, maybe?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Do you ever stop and go, I went from a 1,600 pound total to 28?
I've never thought of that actually. That shoot until you. I hadn't even thought about that meet in years.
That's huge. That's a huge game. So okay. So then you went and played football. What positions were you playing in football, and where'd you play?
Primarily nose tackle. I did a little bit of short yardage fullback, and then I did short snapping as well. And that was at the Colorado School of Mines, Division II.
Cool. So you finished out your career there.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure you got a degree. I'm pretty sure you have your degree.
Yeah, petroleum engineering. Tried to do the NFL thing. Had a teammate that was really good, multiple time All-American, and he went to camp with the Jaguars. So we had some attention from scouts following our senior year. Had a good team. I tried to go the NFL route. We had pro days, did a couple of those, and tested really well. They had at the time, it was called like the Kirwan Explosive Index, and I hit the highest score on there they ever had. It was like a combination of bench press reps, which obviously skewed it in my favor. Bench press reps.
How many did you do? The 225?
Yeah, at the pro day I did 52.
That's got. I swear I looked this up the other day, and like the best ever was like somewhere around that.
I think the most ever at the combine was like 45.
So you beat that then?
Yeah, but I did it at a pro day, so
it didn't count for the combine one, but
yeah,
still 52 reps. That's a lot.
Yeah, and then that explosive index takes into account like the vertical jump, broad jump. So I tested really well. I had decent tape. It was the year of the NFL lockout, 2010.
Oh,
and
shit.
I had interesting conversations with the Eagles and the Redskins. That year, they didn't have any rookie mini camps or anything like that because of the lockout. I'm sure it would have helped. I don't know if it would have made the difference, but I never got my shot, and I chose to just move on with my career in powerlifting, and didn't want to wait around another year and try and go play in the CFL, another league, and get back in. Just decided to move on.
So then was it when you made that decision, was it like, hey, I'm going to start powerlifting like serious?
Yeah. Yep.
And then were you still in Colorado then at that time?
So I graduated college and immediately went to work full time with the employer who I'm still with. And in that time, I've kind of bounced around between Wyoming and Oklahoma.
Okay. So say your first, what was your first, like, hey, I'm gonna push this powerlifting thing. What was your first total there?
Yeah. Man, you're asking me to dig deep in my bad memory.
Honestly, like if you asked me these questions, I'd be like, shit, I don't know. Like 1,800, I don't know.
Got to look numbers up online. Those were, but what I distinctly remember at that time period, graduating college and going to work and deciding I want to pour myself into this powerlifting thing as hard as I can. I was lifting USAPL and IPF because that's what my first exposure was, and that's all I'd ever known. And got exposed to that, and you see the same meets and the same people, and that's what you set your sights on, and that's where I became focused. I remember at that time being frustrated because that was around 2012, and that was when Raw started to get a little more traction,
right?
But globally, like IPF, everything was still single ply. And so I was doing both at the same time, Raw and single ply, and I hated the gear. It pissed me off because I had a really good Raw squat. So I think like 2012, I did 881 Raw squat, which was like at that time the biggest in IPF, even though Raw was still so new. And I'd get so frustrated because I'd go to the equipped worlds and I'd get my ass kicked by these guys who I knew I was hundreds of pounds stronger than them Raw. So it frustrated me because I was like, this gear's dumb. It's BS. I know I'm stronger than these guys. I know their butts Raw. But instead of just like cowering away and just choosing to lift Raw, I'm like, I'm going to figure this gear stuff out. So I just spent more time in it, and to the point I eventually figured it out and got good with it and loved it. And
I like that attitude. I don't think a lot of people understand. Like I think it's become a little more accepting now. When I was doing it, there was this huge kickback between raw and gear and single ply and double ply. And I'm like, can't we all just get together? Like, it's like drag racing. We all just choose different divisions. But I think there's a lot of people that don't get the complexities. Like, if you lift raw, I understand you're lifting raw, and that is a whole different ballgame in itself. So it has its own difficulties. But then putting gear on has its own difficulties too. You don't just throw gear on and you're like automatically stronger. Like, it can actually, like, a lot of people I've seen put gear on and they get weaker.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to forcing into it and not used to the pressure or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I know it's a hot button subject anymore. And I think right now, the people that are the strongest in the world raw are stronger overall and, better powerlifters than the top tier equipped folks these days. But the hot button thing, that equipped is much harder than raw. You can interpret harder however you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a big skill aspect with raw powerlifting. You can improve your technique to a certain point, but it does not take very long to master a squat, a bench press, and a deadlift technically. But the equipment adds such an element of skill, and anything with skill takes time and practice and the learning process and frustration. So in that regard of my definition of hard, the equipped is much harder.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I go, here's how I explain it. If the gear allowed you to easily stay in the position, then it wouldn't help you much. It helps you because it's trying to throw your ass out of position. So, like, you have to force into position and control that in order to actually get anything out of it. And I think that's a huge skill. Like, somebody who just benches raw or squats raw, it's like, well, yeah, I just squat into position. And gear, you don't. You have to literally, like, you have to force that shit to go where you want it to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole different ballgame. And I've always respected raw lifting. I've always lifted some raw. I didn't really do that many competitions raw. To me, it's just different. It's just, I like it all. It's still lifting to me.
Yeah. And I'm on the same boat as you. Like, these top level raw lifters just make my jaw drop. It's absurd what they're doing.
Yeah. When I see guys squatting 1,100 pounds raw, I'm like, wow, I'm impressed. I'm just so impressed. Like, in my day, that was not, hell, when I started, I think the raw record in gear in a canvas suit was like 1,050. And now somebody beat that raw. That's crazy.
Yeah. And bounce for me at that time, bouncing between raw and equipped, the raw meets in terms of executing and doing what you need to on game day, raw meets, they felt like a walk in the park compared to the gear. There's like no stress associated with it. You go out and lift with the gear. It's like timing your knee wraps correctly, getting your wraps done correctly, the stress of traveling and bringing all your gear, getting your straps up, your bench shirt set before your attempt. And at the international meets, there's like no time for warm-ups or turnaround. It's like you finish squats and you're rolling into benches and trying to get your warm-ups timed. And it's
if you came in 5 pounds heavier, that could completely change how your suit feels.
Yep.
Or whether you're going to touch or not in your shirt. Like, yeah, it has a lot of complexities. I think if people understood it, like when I used to train at the gym, American Iron, every now and then somebody won't be interested in the gear. And I'm like, well, if I can find something that fits, let's throw you in a bench shirt one day. And like, after one session, they're like, holy shit, that was horrible. Like, I totally have a whole different concept now of that. So you were focusing on powerlifting in like 2013, you said?
Ish. I would say 2011, 2012 is when I jumped in full time.
You were already a super heavyweight by that point, right?
Yep.
So who I'm trying to think who was the big IPF super heavyweights at that time.
I think Brian Siders was on like the tail end of his career. And then Brad Gillingham, who's one of my all-time favorites and heroes, he had kind of transitioned over to Raw at that point, but Siders and Gillingham were like the IPF guys that I looked up to coming up.
Both of those, I did a meet with Siders one time, and he was so fun to talk to. He has a one eye that wanders.
Uh-huh.
And I kept going like, what are you looking at, Brian? And but he was just raw strong.
Yeah.
And Gillingham, god damn, how long did Gillingham compete? I mean, like my whole career, Gillingham was good, like one of the best IPF guys.
Yeah. He's deadlifted over 800 pounds. I'll get it totally wrong, but it's like well over 100 times or something in competition. It's absurd. His longevity, deadlift's insane.
It was his hand strength was ridiculous too. So you come in and what, like, by that time after college, what was your first, do you like give me a ballpark of what your first meet was?
The first big meet I can think of after college was the essentially the Raw Worlds in 2012, which was like the first year they had it. I think so IPF Raw, I squatted 881, I benched 512 and deadlifted maybe like 733. And then I did Equip Worlds that same year. So I got first at Raw Worlds, and I think I got like sixth at Equip Worlds. So the Equipped Worlds that year, I had squatted 1,000 in gear, but I didn't at that meet. I did maybe like 980 or something at that meet, maybe like a 580 to 630 something bench, and probably a 730-ish deadlift.
So you were still 22 something probably.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there. So even by that time though, by that time, were you thinking I can do some damage here?
On the Equip side, no, that like I was still at that point because I just looking around, I was like, I know I'm, especially on the squat, like I could destroy these guys. Why do I suck so much? So it took a few years to get to the point where I could smash them.
So that was because when did you hit your I think I have it right here. So where's the date on this thing? So like 2020 is when you put up your 2850.
Yep.
So that was still 8 years from like after graduating college.
Yeah. I graduated in 2010, I guess. So after.
I think I like to, when I have guests on here, I like to kind of go through their history, because it seems like there's a lot of younger lifters that just think they can do this. Like in a year, I could be benching 500 pounds.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just because you like these people, like if you like these lifters and respect them, like go back and look at their history and look. I mean, it takes time to get that strong. Like it just doesn't happen overnight. And I like it, like you people like, well, he was just born big. How do you know that? You don't know that. Like, go look and actually see.
Yeah.
Because that was quite a journey you had to get to that point. It wasn't like, oh, hey, he's just naturally strong and like, you know.
Yeah. In the age of instant gratification, and there's always examples now, especially on social media. It's easy to find an outlier of a guy that has been a guy or a girl that's been competing for 2 years and they're at the top of the world, but that's the exception, not the rule.
It's the true exception. A lot of those people still, like, maybe they've been lifting for a long time and you just never heard of them.
Exactly.
I mean, which is funny too, because you could be lifting for 10 years and then finally you get to this point and then bam, you're really popular in 2 years.
Yes.
But it took 10 years to actually get there.
Yeah. 10 years to become an overnight success.
So one of the things that has always impressed me about you, I'm going to start with this one first. The damn chicken shakes. I tried it. I got down one chicken shake and said, I am never doing that again. Yeah. Did you honestly do those regularly?
Religiously. Forever. 8 of them a day religiously.
Oh my God. Was the first one hard?
Or like it took a long time to get to the point where I could get them cooked and blended to the right consistency and drink them. Like it was a lot of failed attempts. Because I started off like with the natural thing to do. Oh, you grill a nice chicken breast and you season it just like you would want to eat it, and you start blending that. And that was the wrong way. It took a few iterations to figure out you need to cook that as bland and as plain as possible.
Yeah, I tried it and I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's the consistency or the smell or like, that soda Big Red that tastes like bubble gum. I can't even drink that because I'm like, no, my body's telling me I'm supposed to be chewing this, and now I'm drinking it. It's throwing me off.
Yeah.
So did you start doing that? Just like I had a good sponsor with Muscle Milk, so I definitely leaned on protein drinks just because it got hard to eat enough food to maintain 385 pounds. Is that kind of why you did the chicken shake? Because you're like, I need real food, but the faster I can get it down, the easier it is.
That's 100% the reason I had to do it. So I don't know my natural body weight, but obviously I was tall and skinny, and that's kind of my natural build. And I did not have the appetite to eat. I still don't have a big appetite. So there was no way that I could consume enough calories to get up to 385 pounds. So I had to figure out ways to do it. And I realized I could chug a liquid calorie shake. I had tried the chicken and the beef and the rice and the potatoes, and I could eat probably a third or a half of what my daily calorie requirements were. So I didn't have the appetite to eat, so I had to figure out how I could chug it.
Yeah, I was the same way. Everybody thinks and assumes that they're like, oh, it must have been great that you could eat all that food, and I'm like, no, I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hated eating. Like I worked at a wine and liquor warehouse, and like guys would actually watch me eat lunch because they would be laughing. And they're like, dude, how long have you chewed that last bite? And I'm like 100 times. Like I'm so sick of eating. When I would get done with the meat and everybody's like, oh, what are you going to do? I go, I'm not going to eat for 2 days. Like I'm so sick of eating.
Yep.
And that's where when people tell me I can't gain weight, I'm like, oh, bullshit. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
You got to suck it up and just realize the fact that you don't want to eat it. You're not going to want to eat it, but you got to get it down.
Yep. And just the convenience of it too, when you're trying to eat that many meals a day and that many calories, you're full all the time. And it gets to the point where just eating one serving takes 45 minutes because you're sitting there and, like you said, you're chewing it for hours and hours. Whereas the shakes, it's like I had them all ready to go, and just 10 seconds, they're down the hatch and I'm done with my meal.
Yeah, I could always slam until I got to the chicken shake. I could always slam stuff. But you see that now I feel better about myself now because even you said it was a little hard at first. You had to kind of figure it out.
Horrible. Yeah.
And then, so one of the other things that really impressed me about you, watching your videos and stuff, like I'm guessing you have a very strong mentality because I've seen a lot of videos of you training by yourself, or I'm assuming your wife was probably there to help with gear or whatever. And like I would always watch those videos and go, dude, there's a guy that doesn't make excuses. Like because I've seen you do, God damn, I've seen you do. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I swear I've seen videos of you benching 800-900 pounds, like unracking it yourself and benching by yourself.
Yep. I've done that.
That's so rare. There's so many people like, oh, well, so-and-so didn't show up, so I can't bench heavy today. And like everybody has excuses. And I just want to show them your videos and go, no, Blaine just did it by himself. He's lifting crazy ass weights with basic spotters. And I've seen you have a couple, what was the one I think you wrecked with a squat and you like tore the shit out of your hand. Oh, that one. But you were still like, it was like, I had a ton of respect because I'm like, dude, this guy's like this guy. He's all or none, man.
Yeah. It was just the mentality of like no excuses, just how you said, but it's like it's not even an option in my head. It's like I'm here to do this and it's what I'm going to do. And just, for work, I kind of traveled bouncing around between Wyoming and Oklahoma a few times. And throughout all that, I did usually have somebody that was there to help me in some way, whether it was like to wrap my knees or help me with put a shirt on. But I never had like a crew of guys lifting together and you got 4 spotters there with you. I never had that. And I don't know, it just became what I did.
That reminds, like, when people, because I have pretty bad sleep problems and I have depression problems, and people are like, how do you do that? And I go, what do you mean, how do I do it? They're like, how do you like train so hard when you're not sleeping and stuff? And I go, what do you mean? I'm like, there's only 2 options: either do it or don't. And don't is not an option for me, so I don't really think of it as anything impressive. Kind of like you, it's like, well, no, this is what I wanted to do, this is how I had to do it. Like, it wasn't a choice. I'm doing it. So this is what I do.
Yep. Honestly, the squats gave me a lot more adrenaline than the bench did, because I have those boxes that I had made on the bench. And just with the arch and the big body, if something happened on the bench, I felt very safe to get out from underneath of it. But the squats, different story.
Yeah, squats. I started training when I first started training, because I didn't make the freshman year. I didn't make the football team. I made the football team and not first string, so I was pissed. And I'm like, what do I got to do? I got to get bigger and got to get stronger. And I had trained with my brother for a couple months when he got ready for football. He was about a year older than me, and so I started buying stuff for my basement, because I grew up in the Midwest, so everybody has basements. And I have multiple stories of burying myself with benches. And then you either got to tilt it off to the side, or I started rolling it down my stomach, which was a great ab workout because you got to stay flexed when you're rolling it down your stomach. And I remember dumping some bad squats till I finally was able to buy a squat rack. But yeah, I guess it was kind of the same thing. I was like, well, I got to get stronger. So what if I don't have anybody to, like, I still got to do it.
Yep.
But I remember watching your videos and I'm like, oh yeah, that dude's a badass. Like, he's just like nonstop. And so do you remember the first record you broke in the IPF, like world record?
Um, I want to say it was probably the bench press. I think I did a 885 bench press at the Arnold in maybe like 2016, 17-ish. 885. I think that was my first IPF world record.
How was that? Was that like a big deal for you at the time, or was it kind of like, yeah, I expected to hit that number, so cool?
Uh, yeah, I guess it was I always expected to hit that number. I don't know if this is a mentality of an equipped lifter, but it was like no number was ever impossible, and no number is ever enough. I think that's pretty common, but it's like, if I did 885, why can't I do 985? So like nothing that ever satisfied me. I was never happy or content. Like, oh, cool, I got that number. It's like it was never enough. So, yeah, it was like it felt cool to get it, but I wanted more.
Wow, we have very similar attitudes. But I think being at the top of the level, and I don't know if you felt this too, but there was a point where I'm like, I know all these great, impressive guys, and I'm like, I'm going to make the greatest training program ever. And the more I talked to them and the more I listened, I'm like, everybody's doing their own thing. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. So, okay, Chad, back up and start over. And like, what's the commonality between all these people? And the biggest thing I could ever come up with was like a mentality, like they just believed in themselves and they weren't going to quit. And I remember my team, or the guys that traveled with me and stuff, would always razz me because if I broke a record, I'm like, yeah. Hey, Ethan, was I tight enough? Did I keep my elbows tucked right? And he's like, what are you doing? You just broke the world record. And I'm like, yeah, but I can do more. Like, I know I can do more. So it's like, great that it's world record, but I can do more. Like, you don't understand. I can do more. And
Yeah.
I kind of struggle with that concept now. And I go, should I have taken like a week to celebrate it? Or was that the mentality I needed to keep pushing it no matter what?
Yep. Yeah. My opinion, I think you got to keep that mentality.
Yeah.
That's the key to it. It it's nice to stop and smell the roses, but you got to you got that mentality or you don't.
Yeah, I think there's a certain mentality. I wonder this concept too. Like, can I teach someone that mentality? And I don't think you can. I think you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could probably improve it a little bit and make some people better. But I think there's that drive. I mean, even if like looking back at what you're telling me now and about your career and stuff, I mean, you sounds like you kind of had that the whole time. Maybe you developed it and refined it. But I mean, you were a skinny kid. You didn't go, oh, well, I'm a skinny kid. I can't get big. I'm a skinny kid. I can't get strong. You were like, yes, so what? I'm gonna.
Yeah. You got to have that obsessive, undying, just tunnel vision, get it at all costs mentality to achieve things like that.
So then I actually I had Andrew Locke on, which I think you know, and we were
Yep.
kind of talking about you. And basically, is the reason you stopped competing at that level over the last few years was from the back injury, right?
Yeah.
And I can't remember what Andrew said you had. Did you break the spinous process in the back, or didn't you have something to do with your vertebrae?
Yep. It was kind of a cascading of events. So I blew up my L5S1 disc in like 2008. Real common. A lot of people have done it, and it's something I just dealt with through my career. I would
Mm-hmm.
have a after a meet or after a heavy squat, I'd have a relapse like a couple times a year. It would, send me into the typical disc pain where I was kind of jacked up for 2 weeks or so. I always dealt with it. Um, that got me hooked up with Stuart McGill in like 2017, and he definitely added a few more years onto my career. And then the thing that did it in was my biggest squat, that 1135 at the Arnold in 2020. On that squat, and I'm almost certain it was on the walkout of it. I fractured part of my L5 vertebrae, and it sounds serious and it's bad, but it wasn't as debilitating as some of my other stuff. So um, it actually took me a while to figure out what was going on, because after the meet, my back was hurting, and the pain felt a little different, but it was in the same local area as all my disc problems.
Right.
Um, and so for the longest time, I rehabbed it like it was my disc. But it was very weird because it didn't bother me at all in day to day life. Like, yeah, I could kind of feel something, but it didn't stop me from doing anything. It felt okay in the mornings. Um, but anytime I tried to load it, it got incrementally worse with the load, like a linear relationship. The more load I did, the worse it got, whether
Mm-hmm.
squat or deadlift type load. And really, this went on for quite a while. And McGill finally suggested I get a deep bone scan, which showed the fracture in the vertebrae. And then that took a very long time to heal from, because it's not like a broken arm where you can put a cast on it. Um, so I had to essentially unload my spine for, it was about 9 months that Stu wanted me to. So I lifted as creatively as I could, like laying prone on the bench and doing stuff with cables, still trying to bench, but like keep my feet up, doing like assisted sissy squats, single leg stuff, trying to maintain everything I could while I unloaded the spine. And that was around then I got hooked up with Locke, and he was very helpful in taking me through the next phases of rehab and relearning how to load everything up, and stuff was going great up until May of 2023. Um, the fracture was healed. Locke had me do another bone scan, and it showed that fracture was healed, which was great news. Um, so started loading things up and being smart and progressing slowly, and then I blew up my L4 L5 disc, and that was 20 times worse than any other pain I'd had between my other disc issues and the fracture. I had nerve damage down my leg, through my foot. Um, and that kind of was the final thing that did me in.
And how are you with that, like right now?
I would say 90% of the time it doesn't bother me in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
If I push it too much, or the worst triggers sleeping on a bad bed, a hotel bed, I'll pay for it for a day. But it doesn't bother me everyday life. The hardest thing is for sure I can't train how I would like. So I can bench. Um, it doesn't really affect my bench or upper body training at all, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't load it up with squats or deadlifts. So the primary things that I do now are like belt squats. I have like a power squat machine that I'll use when I feel okay. The biggest one is like split squats, like Bulgarian split squats or single leg stuff. Um, I've dabbled with some trap bar deadlifts light, but it's pretty much doing a lot of split squats until I puke, which I absolutely hate. And I miss it. I could go in and you think about the number for the day that you're going to load up on squat or bench, and you just think about it, get amped up and torqued up all
Mm-hmm.
day. And now it's like, fuck, I got to go in and I'm going to do split squats until I can't walk and I throw up with lightweight.
Yeah, I have a back one that I'm working on now, and I'm finally starting to able to squat again, but it just doesn't, like, I've never had to worry about it. And you pick up a weight and you're like, yeah, let's go. And now it's like I pick it up and I walk it out and I'm like, all right, I got to find that position. Okay, now I got to hold the position. And it's like mentally it's frustrating to feel that after being so strong and so like almost bulletproof at one point in my life.
Yep. It, it, I feel I've had a fortunate life to be able to say this. But it's emotionally been the hardest thing I've gone through in my life.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
I'm fortunate that if that's the worst thing that happens, that's good. But yeah, it's tough. I miss the hell out of it.
Yeah. Cause you were, well, right now, what are you, like 36?
Yes.
So like honestly, you haven't even hit your prime.
Yep. I say the years are low, but the miles are high.
Yeah. Well, I do think, I'm 52 now, and I'm like, other than this little back injury, and this back injury came because I had a granite company. So I was installing counters and bent over, cutting sinkholes, and like that's what tweaked my back. But even then, my back's getting better now. Like my shoulders are good, my knees are good, my hips are good. I'm like, I got through pretty good. And I think the smarter you lift and I think the better your technique is and stuff, you can do it longer. But the fact of the matter is, we're putting weight on our body that I don't think any human body was actually designed to deal with.
Yeah.
And
Did,
so it has to take some toll at some point.
did, did your hips and knees bother you when you were at your prime?
No.
I, I think a big part of that is the gear, um, because both hips and both knees are bad on me. Both my hip labrums are torn, but both of them came from raw squatting and like the ultra deep IPF deep squat.
Mm-hmm.
But putting the squat suit on was the only thing in the world that gave me relief from the hip pain. And I think if I never went crazy with raw squats and I was always in a suit for heavy stuff, I don't think I would have hip issues.
Yeah. When I was late getting into powerlifting because I threw the shot put in college, and I had chronic compartment syndrome, which they didn't really weren't able to diagnose until college. Then we had surgery. Surgery didn't work. So they're basically like, listen, if you keep throwing, you have a chance of, we're going to have to amputate your legs at some point. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want that. Like, I love throwing, but nothing's worth losing my legs. So I had to stop throwing, but I was still able to lift. And I found that if I had lifting in my life, I didn't get in much trouble. The few times I stopped lifting, I would start getting in trouble. So I kept lifting, and I like to lift heavy. So when I found powerlifting at like 27 or 28. And at that time, I think I was squatting like 545 for 5 sets of 5, like Olympic style, ass to ground. And my knees would ache for 4 days after every session. And then once I got into powerlifting, and I'm like, I need to learn more. And I started learning technique and stuff. All of a sudden, my knees didn't hurt anymore. And then I started going into gear. And yeah, I do think the gear, because like even if I mean, even if you get a little loose, the gear helps keep everything really tight.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's a point where that helps. And then, I mean, we always lifted raw to some extent, but I never really pushed what I could lift raw. So it is an interesting idea of, does the gear actually help
Yeah.
the longevity of your body?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I've torn a lot of muscles, but my joints, I don't remember having any really bad joint problems.
Huh. And see, I'm the opposite. I've never ever had like a muscle strain or muscle issue, but all my joints feel like shit.
I'm gonna lean towards, I'm okay with my muscle tears because my joints are good. But it seems like all the other guys I competed with, like almost everybody I competed with, is beat to hell.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's genetic or if it was because I was such a technician, or it's hard to say, you know?
Yeah. McGill said something that really stuck with me, and it's he was talking about my back, but it applies to hip joints or joints in general. But if you want a healthy back or healthy whatever, the best thing you can do is pick your parents. Insinuating that your genetics plays a massive role in how durable your
Mm-hmm.
disc or how much wear and tear your take.
I do remember, I want to get him on this podcast at some time because I've never got to talk to him. And I really like the way he looks at stuff. And like, I think because he's into cars and stuff, he has a really, I kind of understand how he explains it. And I remember reading something where he was mentioning that there's actually two kinds of discs. And you could be born with the kind of disc that's great with rotation, but horrible with loading. Or you could be born with the disc that's great with loading, but horrible with rotation.
Yep.
And I always thought, dude, that's a fascinating concept. I had never heard that. And if that's true, couldn't your other joints be like the same way?
Yeah, I think so.
You know, where maybe somebody's born to run forever and it's not going to bother them. And maybe somebody's born to lift really heavy shit and it's not going to bother them.
Yep.
That would be interesting to know. It'd be interesting to know if you could figure that out when you were a kid. And they
Uh-huh.
could go, hey, here's what sports you're going to be really good at. Here's what you're going to pay if you do these ones. I
Yep.
don't know if it would. I'm so hard headed, it wouldn't change anything anyway. But it's definitely interesting to think about. So, did you ever think about going multiply?
Towards the very end of my career, so towards 2020 there, was the closest I'd ever been. And for the reasoning being, I felt like competing the way I was in the IPF was just a ticking time bomb. And it ended up being,
Yeah.
the squatting the weights that I was, with the bars that they had, with the depth requirements that they were making you go to. I just knew it was a ticking time bomb for me. And I just felt like if I could not have to walk weight out, and I could have a thicker bar, and I could squat 1 or 2 inches higher, that even though the weight would be more, that it would be better on my body.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I didn't end up having this downfall of my back, I don't know where I would have landed. Um, it's fun to think about, but at the end of the day, I don't know if I would ever have been like, you know, jumped, because you just compete in one place with a certain familiarity and same competition, that I don't know if I ever could have pulled away from it, but I was thinking very strongly of it towards the end.
Mm-hmm. I know when you said earlier, it was kind of like what you were surrounded with. So that's what you did. And
Yeah.
I know people ask me, well, why didn't you lift raw? And well, because in my day, the best of the best were wearing gear.
Yeah.
I wanted to compete against the best of the best. So that's what I did.
Yep.
Quite honestly, if I was 27 now getting into lifting, I'd probably lift raw,
Yeah.
you know? And the squat depth is an interesting thing because I'm really into the anatomy and physiology and the structure of the body. And like you start looking at the hip, and the IPF, they want you to break parallel. Like at that point, the load on your hip becomes a whole lot more
Yep.
than just hitting parallel. And I've always thought, like in this rule book, why should you have to break parallel? Shouldn't it be hit parallel? Like, shouldn't that be the line? But that's just the way the federations are, you know.
Yep. And something I learned from McGill too is like the hip anatomy that you were talking about. So he McGill tested me, and I have what he called Scottish hips, meaning I have very deep hip sockets,
Mm-hmm.
which it's very good for like top end power. So like the top part of a
Yeah,
squat.
because it
Very
fits in there really good.
Yep.
But when
But
you get deeper, it's putting
which
a whole lot more stress. Like somebody with a narrow, should not deep. What's the opposite of deep? Uh,
shallow.
shallow. A shallow hip joint is putting nowhere near the amount of stress at the bottom that you're putting on like that, which actually is kind of a little more impressive. I mean, you have deep sockets and you still did an insane squat.
I think those small things like that I'm sure I'm not unique. Everyone's got ideal and non-ideal parts of their anatomy, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that specifically is hurt me because I'm certain those deep hip sockets are what made me tear both hip labrums trying to get the crazy IPF European depth. And
Right.
then my hip joint runs out of room, and so at the bottom of my squat, what I need to do to get the rest of the depth, you start
What does
with a
that
little.
do to your, yeah, because I can guarantee your pelvis is now not it's probably tilting back, which now is loading up your low back. So yeah,
Yep.
you're just going up to change is changing everything else. I need to ask Eddie Cohn about that because Ed had both his hips replaced, and Squat University posted one like what 930 of his, and I'm like, oh, I got to watch this. And I reposted it and did it in slow mo, mostly because I wanted to see it in slow mo and I wanted to see a freeze frame at the bottom. So I did it and reposted it. And it's like, holy shit, dude. IPF depth is, especially some of the shit that's getting passed nowadays. IPF depth was a whole different story back then.
Yeah.
But I wonder if Ed Cohn had deep hip sockets too, if he even knows that.
Yeah.
Because for him to go as deep as he was, and I mean, he didn't go super wide, but he was pretty wide too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, God, how much stress was that on his hips? And maybe that's why he had to get them replaced because they were deep and he was doing that to it.
Yep.
Interesting, because he's got strong. His hands are huge. He's short and his hands are huge. His joints are huge.
Yeah.
But I mean, that like, hey, that made his joints strong. But in terms of trying to hit that depth, it wasn't so great.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So, gear kind of became a different thing too. Like around your time, I think they were getting better with the single ply gear to where it was more secure. Like
Yeah.
single ply, you could blow the shit out of single ply gear when, back in the day.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of bench shirts just blow up.
Uh-huh.
And some of the guys, when I was doing double ply, some of the guys were talking about how the single ply is getting better. And even with Jimmy Kolb, like Jimmy Kolb's, he almost thinks he's better in one of the single plies compared to some of the double plies.
Huh.
So yeah, it's always hard to say what if I would have done this or what if I would have done that,
Yeah.
because even when people talk about like raw numbers, I'm like, well, I mean, I'd hit 600-pound raw benches. Like I could still squat over 9 raw. I just never trained it. And
Yep.
then I think, well, what if I would have trained it more? Would it have gotten better? Well, I think so, but maybe not. Maybe I would have started training raw all the time and it wouldn't have helped that much. Like
Yeah.
there's all these what ifs and it's all a bunch of what ifs. Depends, like Dave Tate says. Still fun to think about though.
It is.
I even like some of my training partners used to talk about my sleep because I actually did one competition where I was awake for like 7 or 8 days. And they're like, well, what if you would have slept? What could you have done? And I'm like, I think it would have been crazy, but you know what? Maybe I wouldn't have done as good. I mean, maybe I needed that adversity to like push my hell. I don't know.
That's a dang good point.
And I was thinking about it the other day because I'm always, I try to help people now. I want to coach. I still love the sport. I want to pass on the knowledge that I have. And I'm always telling people, get your sleep, get your sleep, get your sleep. And then the other day I thought, Shed, you're telling everybody to get your sleep, but you did pretty good with no sleep. So how important is sleep?
Valid point.
But I also don't want anyone to deal with the depression I've dealt with either. And I think that's tied to my sleep.
Sure. Yeah.
So with gear, I know some people like tight gear, some people like loose gear. I found that gear can be too tight and actually mess you up. Like, so for me, I wanted it kind of tight, but not crazy tight.
Yes. So my only experience, I'm coming from single ply polyester stuff. That's all I've ever touched or known. My squat suit was definitely loose, and part of that was training by myself and learning how to get a suit on and straps up and wrap my knees by myself at times. But
Dude, wrapping your knees with a suit on—that's a fucking challenge right there.
yeah, I don't think I got ones out of my knee wraps honestly because I hate much, and then I never got a good wrap on them when I was wrapping myself. So training by myself was part of the necessity of a looser suit, but the other piece was I always had horrible times getting depth. Even even in a loose suit. So yeah, I had
deep hip sockets.
that. I so my suit was always pretty loose. Uh, my bench shirt, that's I for sure um, got the best in gear in my bench shirt compared to my squat suit. I got real good with the bench shirt, and it's pretty wild. Like I could put it on myself. The sleeves were tight, but the rest of it wasn't all that tight. So people like in the warm up rooms always thought it was crazy when I was putting the shirt on by myself with ease, like no struggle to get it on. I just learned how to utilize it to get the most carryover. And
That
then
kind of makes sense though. I mean, I was double ply, but I could put my shirt on by myself.
yeah,
And if it was too tight, I actually didn't bench more. And funny, I've told this story, but I never thought about it till just now. My actual best competition squat, my gear was loose and I put it on myself.
no shit.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's actually, I mean, I've told the story because I think I told it the other day to somebody, and I weighed in light and my gear was kind of older. And I had just picked up all brand new gear from Elite because it was at the Arnold. And my partner was talking to Louis, and I was ready to put my briefs on, and he turns around and I got my briefs on, and he's like, what's that all about? And I go, I don't know. They just slipped on. And he goes, all right, let me get the new ones. And I go, no, no, no. I'm not putting new stuff on going into a meet. And then I did more warm-ups, and then he's still talking to Louis, and I put my suit on, and he turns around. He's like, that's it. I'm getting the new gear. And I go, no, you're not. I go, we're going with this. I'm not changing. But I mean, maybe that right there, maybe I should have thought about that more at the time.
It, wild, especially with the bench shirt. But if stuff gets too tight, it and it screws your technique up to the point you can't even adhere to what you should be doing in the gear. It hurts you. Like the bench shirt, for example, everyone thinks tighter, tighter, tighter. But if you get your bench shirt so tight to the point where it's like crushing you when you try and touch, and it extends your range of motion by 2 inches, you're
Yeah,
better off
then
with a looser shirt that's not going to extend your range of motion.
yeah, or if it puts you out of technique where you're not as strong or out of position where you're not as strong, then what was really the purpose of it?
Yep.
I actually argue that I don't bring up the drug stuff very much, but with Tren, this Tren messes your sleep up. So I was talking to these guys that are taking so much Tren they can't sleep. And I go, well, wait a minute. Is the Tren helping you more than losing your sleep? Like maybe you'd be better off if you slept and didn't take so much crap that it screwed your sleep up.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's interesting. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know that I kind of did this in my lifting career, but not as bad as a lot of people. A lot of powerlifters get so wrapped up in powerlifting that they have nothing else in their lives. And I almost think that that's when they end up overtraining and they end up doing too much. And I always tried to have other things in my life when I was powerlifting, and I keep seeing clips of you catching some nice ass bass.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering if I moved to Nevada when I moved here to go for college, and I haven't fished for bass since growing up in the Midwest. In the Midwest, we fished all the time. So I always like when you post stuff about fishing. Is that, I mean, did you do that the whole time you were powerlifting? Did you have other hobbies, or were you completely immersed in powerlifting?
I would say, I would pretty much say I was completely immersed in powerlifting. Um, I've always loved to fish like my whole life, but I never ever let it interfere with powerlifting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, if I had a hard training session, I wasn't going to cut my sleep short to get up early to go, and I certainly wasn't going to miss any training session ever to go fish. It was more like a spare a hobby when I had spare time. But I did have something outside of powerlifting. I'd say would be like my career, and I was very very like two distinct separate people, like Blaine at work and then Blaine not at work.
Yeah.
I had that to focus on and think about outside of training. But honestly, I would most of my competitive life think that it was every waking moment was about powerlifting.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think sometimes looking back, where I have a lot of hobbies. I like guns. I like hiking. I like motorcycles. I like bikes. I love being out in the desert and whatever off-road thing I had at the time. And like, it just seemed to me always that I needed time to like get away and not think about it.
Uh-huh.
Because I used to actually dream. I would come to the gym sometimes and have a huge grin on my face, and my partners and teammates would be like, "Son of a bitch." They're like, "What did you dream up last night?" And I'm like, "Oh, I dreamt of this exercise. I don't know if it's going to work, but we're doing it today." Like, I literally would dream about powerlifting.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, I think you have to have that, but I think there's a little bit of a balance where it's like you need a little time to not be doing it too, you know?
Uh-huh.
So your training, what style of training did you do?
God. Probably like most people you talk to, it started off with trying every little thing, and then eventually to the point took lots of little things from lots of things and essentially made it my own. um, I would say my equipped stuff was I wouldn't say conjugate, but very max effort. um, so in the gear each week was like singles around my opener weight, but I didn't do much variations in terms of like boxes or bands accommodating resistance. It was almost just like very specific competition style with my gear. And my
Mm-hmm.
thought process that was I was trying to get as good as possible with my gear. So I didn't want to introduce other variables like contrasting the weight with bands or chains. I wanted to focus on adjusting my suit, like pull the legs higher, pull the straps lower, or mess around with bench shirt. So my variables were how am I using my gear different to do these singles. Um, but I still did heavy focus on raw and bodybuilder type training, even through all the equip stuff. So the equip stuff was singles, and then the raw stuff I would say was more like Western periodization, where I'd start off my training cycle with singles in the equip squat, and then I'd go do 5x5 in the raw squat, and then I'd follow that up with 5 sets of failure, 12 to 15 reps with leg extension, leg curls type stuff.
Did you ever do dynamic work?
Um, so I visited Louis in God, I think it was 2017. Um, so I would say prior to that, I thought I was doing dynamic work, but I wasn't. Once I visited him and I understood dynamic work, I incorporated it quite a bit more.
And do you use accommodating resistance for that portion though?
Yep, but not in gear.
Right. That kind of makes sense though. I'm similar to you in that one where like with the max effort stuff, I'm like, I just want to feel straight weight. Because I go chains and bands do not feel the same as straight weight. And I
Yeah,
kind of think it's gotten so popular now that there's a lot of people using a lot of bands and chains when it's like, come on, just handle some weight.
yep,
And especially if you're training in your gear is kind of accommodating resistance.
yep,
Like in the hardest part of the lift, it helps you. So then I see people in gear with bands, and I'm like, aren't you just doubling up on the same freaking concept? Like it
yep.
seems like too much to me.
Uh,
Did you feel like I think dynamic training is interesting to me because I think everyone's a little bit different. Like if I have a really, really explosive client, I'm like training him like dynamic that much almost seems like a little bit of a waste of time because he's
Mm-hmm.
already so explosive. But then I feel like the people that aren't explosive, it actually kind of helps that they get a little more out of it. And I'm just wondering with your athletic background, are you pretty explosive naturally?
I would say like genetically, I don't think so, but through the training, I would say I became an explosive athlete.
Mm-hmm. So it probably benefited you to just keep you explosive
Yep.
towards that. So
Yeah.
you, I mean, it sounds like a kind of a modified version of conjugate where you put a lot of emphasis on the supplemental stuff too, and changed your
Yep.
max, you change your max, you change your dynamic.
Yep. I just didn't vary the exercises a whole lot.
Right. Which kind of makes I question that one too. Um I question everything I do. I'm always looking to get better and learn more. But
Uh,
I've thought in my past, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so I mean, I understand changing the max effort exercises, and we do it based on is there a weakness that I can fix, and can I fix that weakness faster by doing a max effort exercise to pinpoint that? But if your lift is really good and your technique is really good, I mean, your weakest point is always going to get the most work and get stronger.
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of things in strength training where I go, I can see that side and I can see that side. So
Yep.
like it's just two different paths to the same point.
I could agree more. So like on the squat, my equip squat, I was always trying to improve the weakest link, but I don't mean like strength weakness. I just mean what's preventing me from squatting more at the meet. And for me, that was controlling the bar whip with 1,100 pounds and these 45-pound bars, the
Oh, that's
oscillation, and then getting to squat depth. So I felt in my training, I was like, I need to practice this as much as possible. So I'd always work around like 1,047 pounds in training and just try and make that better and better to where I understood how to handle the oscillation and I could handle the oscillation and my suit and get to depth. So getting the depth in the suit and handling the bar whip was what was holding me back from numbers in a meet. So that's why I didn't do boxes and accommodating resistance. But then if I felt like my squat or bench needed more strengthening at a certain point, like we'll say my bench, I need to strengthen the top. I wasn't doing the shirt and plus bands, plus boards and all that. I would train specifically in my shirt like I was going to do it in a meet. And if I wanted to strengthen the top end, then okay, after the shirt's off, throw bands and boards on and do it raw and do a lot of volume was my philosophy.
I actually like that. My first thought is the oscillation thing's actually really important. Like that's a big factor. Like I mean, when with the double ply and a lot of the other federations, we're using bars now that are made to squat. They're made for massive squats. You're still
Yeah.
using a pretty standard bar that now you're lifting so much that the whip has got to be ridiculous
Yeah.
in that thing. And
And
if you don't time that right, it's going to try to drill you back into the ground.
yep. The bar oscillation was the worst thing that I had to deal with. I hated it more than the depth. And it's weird because I didn't call it whip. Like it wasn't an up and down feeling. It's a back and forth feeling. And I think the reason why is that weight with that thin of a bar, the center of gravity became so much lower because the plates were hanging down compared to where the bar was on my back, almost like a bamboo bar. So like as I was going down, it wasn't like an up and down whip; it's a back and forth whip. And so the back and forth oscillation of the bar throwing me, plus trying to descend slow, plus trying to get the depth and maintain my balance, and then time back and forth. When is the bar good enough to where I feel like I can drive up? That's what I freaking hated.
You got me thinking now. This is why I love doing podcasts. Because no, now if you, yeah, you're totally right. If you stop and think about that, you're basically squatting with a cambered bar
Yep.
that whips. And like, even if you go back to Conjugate and West Side, they're like, oh, we're going to use this cambered bar because it's actually going to throw the weight forward a little bit, which is going to put more stress on your like middle back. And now you
Mhm.
got it doing this, but now it's whipping like this.
Yeah.
So what you're saying completely and totally makes sense to me. And then my other thought too is if you do a lot with like a cambered bar and then you go to a straight bar, like how that bar bends over your back kind of is a weird feeling too. And
Hmm.
so you're having it set, you're getting set here, you stand up with it, and now it's on your back and it's doing this.
Yeah.
So that's got to feel way different on your back. It almost makes me want to go set up my rack with a shit ton of weight with a straight bar and then do a standard bar
Yeah.
just to get an idea of the difference of how it feels.
You know what's so wild too is the height that I had to set my rack to.
Oh,
Um, I always measured it. I had to set it in my nipples. So like the unloaded bar when I was getting my rack, I would wherever my nipples were is where I needed it because I had kind of a awkward, one step walkout. But the bar flexes so much when I take it off, like I had to accommodate for that. And I mean, I had to lift the bar 6 or more inches just getting it off the rack before I started the walkout.
that's crazy. Because I've always one of my tips for people is, you know, do your heaviest lift in the gym and then measure where the bar is. And I go in and take a tape measure to the competition. Don't get under it and feel it and go, oh,
Yep.
this is right. I go, the bars go, even the big bars we use bent, not to the extent of that one. So that's interesting too. So it's almost like, well, it's like one of the new deadlift bars that are bendy as shit. Like you get
Uh-huh.
under it and you're like, okay, I kind of feel the weight, and then it's just going to progressively. But for what ours would do like this, yours is like this.
Yep.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't think about it. And another cool thing you said was like, and I think people get caught up on this one. Your weakest link can be a lot of different things. It's not always strength.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it, man. I didn't even, man, I didn't even cross my mind about the bar like that. But yeah, and see, that adds a whole new level. You did 11 plus squat with that shitty ass bar. Is your upper body pretty flexible?
Yeah, I would say so. I never had problems getting underneath, those these squat bars are narrower, I think, than
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're quite a bit more now.
I, I never had a problem getting underneath it and carrying it in a low bar position.
That's actually good because there's a lot of guys our size that their shoulders are fucking so tight. Like even Kaz, I think had out on the back in the day, they used to say he's so big he can't get under the bar. And I would know he's so inflexible and fucked up that he can't get under the bar. But I think he always had his hands like open against the collar
Huh.
or the end of the sleeve.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. The IPF's a little bit behind on some stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
I, I
people are getting stronger. The equipment needs to change some for that.
yep. I can't see that ever changing either.
I don't think they will. I don't think they'll. They're pretty hard headed.
Hmm.
I actually did my very first competition. Think I did like two USAPL competitions, and I remember some of the rules I just didn't get, especially because it was the ones I did were just like not even state meets. They were like regional, like part of the state meet.
Hmm.
And I had guys. One of my buddies had a pocketed T-shirt, and they wouldn't let him wear it.
Yep.
One of them worked for Budweiser, so he had his Budweiser T-shirt on. He couldn't wear it. I remember checking into one meet, and they're like, "Okay, what kind of briefs are you going to wear tomorrow?" I'm like, "My underwear." They're like, "Well, we need to see the underwear." I go, "They're tidy whities," and she's like, "Yeah, but we need to see your underwear." I'm like, "Well, here's the ones I have on today. Will that work?"
Yeah. There's weird stuff like that, which it's funny 'cause to me, it doesn't feel too weird because it's all I've ever done and known. But then hearing those kind of stories, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty weird.
But like, again, everything, like there's even in the WPO, I'm like, dude, really? This is what you consider depth? And you want to win. So like if they say, well, that's okay. If you're telling me I can squat that high, then that's where I'm gonna go.
Yep.
Because everyone else I'm competing against is doing it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I think the IPF and the USAPL did have some good points. I think their judging was definitely way better. I do because I used to read the rule books, especially with the squat depth. And I'm like, your book says here to here, but you're making people go here to here. That's not
Yep.
what the book says. But
Yeah,
that's one of those things where you can complain and bitch about it all you want, and it's always going to be, that's just part of the sport.
it is.
And if you choose the sport, that's what it is. If you choose to be a bodybuilder, their rules are subjective as shit in my mind.
Yep.
But if
At
you
least we.
choose to do it, that's what you do. I would never do bodybuilding just because the rules would frustrate me.
Yep. Exactly.
I come from where like, hey man, I didn't step out of the ring, so it counts.
Uh-huh. That was strongman that always looked so cool. It's like because the depth and the judging is what bothered me more than anything else. In lifting, just the inconsistency of it. Strongman seems so cool because it's like you lock it out over your head, you're good. You
Yeah.
can wobble or do whatever, or get the stone up on there. That's all you got to do. Not, oh, your head came off the bench, or this side locked out half a second before that side.
Mm-hmm. It's like, here, you need to pull that bar and you need to be locking out at the end. How you get there is your business.
Yep.
Like in the squat, it was an apparatus. It's like, yeah, you just got to go till those legs touch that thing.
Yeah. Perfect.
Nobody's looking at your hips or your knees, which definitely is a nice factor.
Yeah.
But then I go, that's not a deadlift. He didn't hold on to it. He had straps.
He hitched. Yep.
That's funny. Well, I think you had, I mean, so do you think you'll ever compete again at this point?
That's something that I think about every night. Keeps me up, and I really don't know. It's like I said, emotionally, it's been the hardest thing that I've ever gone through, and I've toyed with the idea about like, oh, would I be happy doing like masters raw lifting at some point? I don't think the answer is yes. It's like given a someone that's addicted to meth or speed, giving them a cigarette and being like, here, get high off of this. I just I, it if I can't be chasing numbers that I've never done or no one else has ever done, it doesn't get the same juices and adrenaline flowing.
Yeah, I've never officially said I'm retired. But then if I start thinking about it, I'm like, eh. And like I had a conversation with Dave Tate one time, and he's like, Chad, I know you. He goes, if you go break a master's record, the first thing you're going to think is like, it's just masters. And I go, you're probably right.
Yep.
And I also I kind of feel like masters is like, that's for the guys that never competed. Like, I hate saying pro because I don't know anybody who actually makes a living doing it. But like, I would feel kind of like a dick because like I was pro and now I'm going to go kill his master's record. And I'm like, that's not really fair. That's more for guys that like they retired and now this is what they're doing. Like I'd rather see them be happy. I mean, not to say I wouldn't do an exhibition maybe or compete, but I just don't see me going after that.
Yep.
Like right now, I just try to find these weird goals in my head and go, well, I want to
Yeah.
do that. I don't care what the goal is. I just want that goal to have to shoot because I still love training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The the thing that really, I'm like you, I haven't used the word I'm retired. The thing that has put me the closest to that is when I blew up that L5 or L4 L5 last year, because I've had so many train wrecks and close calls throughout the years. Like when I sliced my arm open and only my wife was here, like dumping 900 pounds on my belly, uh, getting crushed by squats in meets and dumping bars with spotters that couldn't catch it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of really close calls, and my bad L5S1 disc, and then the vertebrae. Like none of that was enough to make me ever consider stopping. But when I blew up that L4, L5 disc last year and saw for a couple of weeks a snippet of my life, of what life would be like if this was permanent, that scared the living hell out of me. Like, I couldn't go to the bathroom for weeks. Like I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. The most mobile that I could do was like crawl on my stomach on the ground, because if I sat or stood and that body weight started to compress that bulge and push, and for my wife to be there for every bit of it, like, having to help me go to the bathroom, and couldn't drive, being stuck in the house. I mean, yada yada. Like the scare of if I mess up bad, this is what life could be like forever. That was the closest reality check I've needed, because even all the close calls before that, like never got scared or worried or ever made me hesitate from getting under 1,100 pounds again. But being that close to seeing what it would live like, or seeing what life would be like in a wheelchair or some sort of paralysis, was like, that I don't want that.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, it's easy. It's easy when we're younger. You're still young, but it's easier to, at that younger point to go, I don't care. I'm going for it no matter what. And then like when something happens and you're like, you know what, this would really suck. Like this would really suck. And I've been down with 1150 or 1054 I crashed with, and 1173 I crashed with. And I walked away from both of them. And I'm like, that's pretty goddamn lucky.
Yeah.
Like, cause I mean, with the 1054, actually like a year and a half earlier, Ed Russ went down with the 1054 and it screwed. He had like, didn't compete anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely can understand there being a point where you go, I've done really good and I put up some crazy, insane numbers, and maybe it's time to like reel it in, I guess. I imagine the hard part would be your age, knowing you didn't hit your peak and kind of be like,
yeah, emotionally, I'm not ready to be done. But even if I could snap my fingers and be ready to go again, like the things that will set my back now are so minor. I don't think it would be physically possible to load up squats and deadlifts and progress them over year, because I'm still kind of trying to do that, and for my back to stay healthy enough to come close to anything I've done, because the minor things anymore that it takes to set it back is like, pretty that doesn't take much to make me pay for it.
Yeah, and I wonder if I wonder what McGill and Locke say about, like, if you just take it easy over the next 5 years, will it progressively get better? And then if you try to load it up and do another meet, you could end up doing permanent damage that it won't get better.
Yep.
Huh. I can't say one thing. The older I get, the easier it is. Because I think I did, let's see, how old was I when, I think I did my best numbers at like 38 or something like that. And then I was destroying myself mentally because of my sleep and my CNS and my depression. I basically had to stop. Like my family members and my training partners had like an intervention, and they're like, Chad, you're pushing yourself into this point where you're going to kill yourself if you don't stop. So I had to stop and get better, but it was still in my head. Okay, I'm going to get better, and then I'm going to ramp it back up. And that thought was always there. And the older and older I get, I'm like, dude, my window's done, man. Like, you don't even have to worry about this anymore, dude, because not to say I can't do some cool numbers and some cool stuff, but I will never do what I did before. It's not going to happen. And when you get to that age, it makes it a little bit easier.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that where you're at mentally is kind of what I've been thinking about too. It's like if I can squat 800-900 pounds, is that going to make me happy? It's like giving a someone that's done speed their whole life a cigarette and saying, "Here, get high off this now." I
Here's a rock star. Will that be the same?
the good analogy.
Yeah, I think it's in getting older is interesting to me. Like I don't hate it. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not one of those guys that's trying to be younger, but I'm not going to be that guy that goes, I'm 52. I can't do that.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's interesting to go and then go, hey, can I change my thinking and go, hey, I just squatted 800 pounds, but I'm 52. So that's actually not bad,
yeah,
you know, because I still have that drive. I need that drive. I need those goals. I need things to work towards because it is the process that I mean, it's great winning. It's great getting records, but it's always the process. I think that's the deepest love for me. So if I can
agreed.
find the process in ways that are healthier for me, and at this point, I mean, here's a good goal that I have. If I'm like 85 and I can get on a platform and lift, that would be awesome.
That's badass.
So maybe my goal is to like not destroy myself so bad that I can't do that, but to
Uh-huh.
be able to just to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who I have helped him here and there, and I think I talked to him the other day. He's 72 and he's benching like I think he's around 340, 350 right now raw. And I'm like, dude, 400 would be cool. And he goes, yep. He goes, I wanted to talk to you because I want to know if you can help me get to like 400. And I'm like, 400 pounds at 70? Fuck yeah, I'll help you. I go, that would be incredible. I go,
Yeah.
you'll be all over my Instagram if you do that. That'll be so cool. So I'm thinking, I'm trying to change my thinking to longevity now. I would still
Yeah.
want to be doing this in a long time from now.
Uh-huh. Funny story similar to that. So when I started getting deeper into the powerlifting stuff, my dad actually started competing again because he competed in and was in the sport well before I was born, and then life came along and he got out of it. So when I started competing again, so did he. And I don't remember his age at the time, maybe probably in his 50s, maybe towards 60. And he was looking at like world record numbers for the IPF in like the old masters divisions. He's
Yeah.
like, well, I just don't get any weaker for the next 30 years. I get these world records. And, sure enough, gets hurt and can't. But it's funny to think back on that now.
I used to joke about that all the time. I go, you may beat me now, but I'm going to be doing this when I'm 90 and you'll be dead. So then I win.
Yeah. Touche.
It's a sport of attrition, man. You got to stay. Who can last the longest?
That's,
So are you in Wyoming now?
yep. That's where I live.
Dude, how are the winters?
Long and windy and cold.
Ugh.
They suck.
I'm trying to go south a little more. I want less snow. And I don't
Yeah.
even get that much snow here. So I'm kind of a sissy, but I actually moved when I moved because I lived outside St. Louis. When I moved back here, I was like, dude, this is a cakewalk. I go, you guys are bitching that it's 30 degrees. I go, that's nothing. I wear my shorts all year. And now the older I get, I'm like, I'm becoming such a sissy. I go, it's 35 out, and I'm like, this sucks. I go, I still got my shorts on, but this sucks.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So, do you do a lot of outdoor stuff? I mean, do you hunt? I know you fish.
I don't hunt. I do fish a lot though.
So, is Wyoming a cool place for you to live when it's warm anyway?
Yeah. Spring, summer, fall. It's it's the best. There's no people. There's no crowds. There's no traffic. It's
You're speaking my language now.
unbelievable amounts of open space.
I've driven through Wyoming, but I can't say that I've ever spent any time there. I know the times I drove through there, I'm like, this place is amazing.
Yeah, it rocks. I love it.
And
How's
I've seen you. What's the biggest bass you've ever caught?
uh I've got some big smallmouth in Montana, close to 7 pounds, but the largemouth fishing here sucks. I caught
Really?
a yeah, it's too cold for them to have much of a growing season.
Oh, that makes sense.
I did catch one right at 10 pounds when I lived in Oklahoma.
Still a pretty damn big bass.
Yeah.
God, I haven't been fishing in so long now that I think about it.
Yeah. I love it.
I enjoyed fishing, although I kind of get spoiled sometimes. I don't have very good patience.
Yeah, it does require patience.
It's a good calming thing to do though,
It is just to
I
be
think.
outside, away from people.
Blaine, I really, really appreciate you being on. It was great to catch up with you. It'd be cool to have you on again at some other point, I'm sure. There's probably lots more things we could talk about.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I've been watching you for a long time, and like I was just coming from double ply and watching the numbers you're putting up, and I'm like, damn. And how you like the training by your as much training as you've done by yourself is like I love just the idea of that, the concept of that I love. This is another good question I've been wanting to ask. That's like your own gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
it's a pretty nice setup.
Yeah, I got all I need for sure.
Yeah. So you've impressed me, man. Your numbers are huge. Are they still, are they all records still?
I'll I really for the equip stuff only pay attention to the IPF numbers. And the squat, bench, and total are still the world records there.
Okay. It's hard, man. There's so many crazy numbers going up right now. Like we're in kind of a cool phase because there's a lot of just crazy shit going on.
Yeah.
In not as much. I think the pool for the multiply stuff is a bit smaller, so there's not as crazy records going on, except for like Jimmy's. And I don't give a shit. I went in one of them stupid bench shirts, them band shirts.
Uh-huh.
Somehow I got invited to the Olympia. I think it was last year, and they were doing the WPO rep for competition thing. And they asked me to do it, and I'm like, dude, I haven't had a bench shirt on in like 7 years, maybe 8 years. And I go, let me call some guys and see if somebody's got one I can borrow. And so I went and did it on like 2 weeks. And I think I benched, it was a rep thing, but I benched like 7 for one. And then I don't know what it was after that. But
Nice.
those new shirts are weird, man. Like they're so springy. And it was like when I first put one on, I went, this is kind of cool, actually. But I mean, it was sick because like the first time I put it on, I was actually in Salt Lake City at my friend's gym, and I was doing a podcast with Laura Phelps. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just doing some benching tonight. And they're like, hey, you want to wear one of our shirts? And I'm like, okay, yeah. Like I hadn't had more than 315 in my hands. I was like repping it. And we put
Yeah.
that shirt on and I went like 675. And I was
Nice.
like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then so I did that meet, and I've had some other things happen. I tweaked my shoulder at the Olympia doing that thing, but still, like Jimmy Kolb doing 1,400 pounds, I'm like, I don't care what he's wearing.
Yeah.
Just holding 1,400 pounds is crazy.
Yeah.
And when
See,
he
that's
did it, they had to switch benches because the first bench, the uprights started bending. And I'm like, that's actually pretty goddamn scary.
yeah.
Steel uprights are bending and you're going to hold it in your forearms.
Mhm.
And like he actually gets his forearms x-rayed fairly regularly because they're finding guys are getting like stress fractures.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so this is kind of cool. It's kind of crazy, but it's just another level again of different powerlifting, you know?
Yep. That's exactly right.
And I'm still waiting for Julius like to break that 800 raw. which is completely ridiculous in my mind too. Like that's just so unbelievable.
Yeah.
But there's all these things. And then I started, I went to the women's pro-am meet. And I really think women are doing better than men at this point. And I don't know if it's because all of a sudden there's a much bigger draw for women, but like women are doing numbers where I'm like, you got to be shitting me.
Yeah.
That's insane. And raw and in gear.
Yep.
I mean, there's multiple women deadlifting 600 pounds now.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I'm just like baffled.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And I want to know how. I want to interview everybody. And I want to go, what are you doing different? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So how does everybody keep getting stronger?
Yeah. It's got to be drawn from a bigger pool and being the sport having more exposure and more people having the opportunities.
I think that's a big one because even when I was lifting, I always thought, and it was funny, I had a conversation with Laura Phelps at one point where Laura was like, yeah, I'm breaking these records, but she goes, how many women are really doing this? And then I kind of got to thinking to the men and going, well, it was still pretty underground when I was competing. And you go, so what if all these people that went to football and went to baseball and like, what if all these really genetic people actually went to powerlifting?
Yeah.
What would happen with powerlifting?
I think that's what we're seeing more and more of.
Mm-hmm. That to me, that makes sense. That would explain where we're just getting a better draw of these genetic freaks.
Yep.
As I was watching Dan Bell, I gotta try to get a hold of Dan Bell. I want to get him on here too. And like he's just a huge his joints are just huge.
Yeah.
And it's like just some guys, people that are just stronger. They were probably always there, but never even heard of powerlifting.
Yep. That's what I think is going on.
Interesting. All right, sir. I'm going to end the podcast here. I appreciate you being on. Like it was great getting to talk to you. If you ever want to be on again, or if I call, I mean, I would be more than happy to have you on again and talk more about all this shit because I love it.
Heck yeah. It's awesome to talk to you, Chad. I wasn't just blowing smoke at the beginning. Like your name and Donnie's names were the big name dudes, super heavyweights that my dad and I kept reading about and looking up to. And I was coming up and I remember reading your EFS training log all the time. So being here chatting to you, it's an honor for me.
I hope that that's where I kind of hope that like some of the stuff we did maybe helped a little with you getting to where you were at a little bit quicker or a little bit better or something like that. And I mean, maybe that's two part of why the numbers are going up because everybody's passing on knowledge now.
Mm-hmm.
And each people get a little bit smarter, a little bit faster. I mean, I look at my career and go, man, if I only knew now, if I could start knowing what I know now, what could I have done?
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah. You played a huge role in mine for sure.
I'm honored because you just watching you like your numbers. Because I remember thinking at one point, Jesus, he just beat me, and he did it in single play gear.
Yeah, the evolves for all,
which is cool. I mean, I love it. You have to love it. Like, and if you love the sport, you want it to get better. Like, you want people to beat you. Like, I can't keep my records forever. Well, I haven't because most of them are gone now. But like, I never even wanted to. Like that would mean I don't like the sport. Like somebody has to beat my record because the sport gets boring when people don't beat records.
Yeah.
And keep it going. All right, sir. I'm going to hit my outro. Again, it was awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Courage Barbell Unlimited podcast. For more information, please visit couragebarbell.com. Until next time.